Only the maid's daughter spoke to Billionaire's deaf mom. Her sign language shocked the entire room. The chandeliers shimmered like frozen fire above the ballroom. Diamonds glittered, champagne flowed, and laughter filled the air. Until the crash. A tray of crystal glasses shattered against the marble floor. The music stopped. Everyone turned. A young waiter stood frozen, eyes wide, trembling. Michael Blackwood, billionaire heir to the Blackwood Foundation, stared at him with disgust. "You're done," he said coldly. "Get out." The waiter stammered an apology, but Michael's voice cut sharper than glass. "No excuses. Leave." No one dared to breathe. The hum of violins died mid-note. Guests looked away, pretending it hadn't happened. All except a small figure standing near the far wall. A girl no taller than the dessert table. Lily, 10 years old, daughter of Sarah the maid, had been refilling water glasses quietly all evening. She saw it all. And what broke her heart wasn't the broken glass. It was that the woman sitting at the head table, elegant and serene, didn't react at all. Eleanor Blackwood, Michael's mother, had been deaf since childhood. Her calm, unreadable face hid a world of silence. Around her, voices moved but never reached her. Even her son rarely tried to speak to her. Communication required patience, and patience was something Michael had long forgotten. But Lily noticed something no one else did. The flicker in Eleanor's eyes, the faint sadness when the room froze, but no one told her why. So the maid's daughter did what no billionaire, no guest, no servant dared. She walked straight across the ballroom. People whispered, some laughed, but Lily ignored them. She stood before Eleanor and began signing with her small hands. "Good evening. The firelight looks beautiful tonight, doesn't it?" For a moment, time stopped. Eleanor's eyes widened, then filled with tears. It was the first time in 20 years that anyone had spoken to her in her own language. And as their silent hands danced through the air, every eye in the room turned to watch, stunned, speechless, while the billionaire's mother smiled for the first time in decades. The gala resumed as if nothing had happened. Musicians found their rhythm, waiters swept the shards, and donors returned to comparing yachts. But something in the air had shifted. At the head table, Eleanor's hands moved with new life, and the lines around her eyes softened into something Michael hadn't seen since he was a boy. Relief. Lily stood beside her like a tiny lighthouse, signaling calmly in the storm. From across the room, Michael watched the impossible. His mother, radiant, laughing without sound, answering a child with sure, deliberate gestures. He had always loved Eleanor fiercely and clumsily, like a man trying to hug through glass. Tutors had been hired and dismissed. Interpreters rotated through like seasons. There was always an excuse. Meetings, deals, next quarter. He had learned to measure the world in returns and respect, then convinced himself that keeping the machine fed was the same as keeping his mother safe. He didn't notice the way people orbited him, board members tight to his gravity well, politicians with lightly clenched smiles, society friends who spoke in champagne and favors. He didn't notice them because he had built them. That was the hierarchy at Blackwood, money first, mercy later. The foundation's marble hallways echoed with vision statements. None of them said, "Listen." "Who is that child?" a senator murmured. "A staff girl," someone else said, dismissive. "Ignore it." But ignoring Lily was like ignoring a bell rung in the bones. A ripple moved through the room, heads tilted, Curiosity pried open. Even the quartet softened, notes falling like feathers instead of blades. Sarah, Lily's mother, hovered a few steps back, hands tight around a tray. She had worked this house for 7 years. She knew every cold draft, every squeaky hinge, every room where people went to be cruel without witnesses. She also knew this moment could cost them everything. Even so, when Eleanor reached for Lily's hand, Sarah didn't move to stop it. Mothers recognized safe harbors on sight. Michael, a cool voice behind him. Isabella Vance, fiancé, diamonds engineered to look effortless. Your mother is animated. Did you plan this? He didn't answer. His eyes were on Eleanor, whose fingers were telling stories at a speed and grace that astonished him. She signed with the old elegance of a language practiced in private, when the world's noise is something you keep outside like rain. Lily kept up, bright, patient, unafraid of mistakes. I asked you a question, Isabella pressed, voice of velvet vice. She needs structure, not surprises. He finally looked at her. Once, he'd admired Isabella for the same reasons donors admired him. Precision, control, the comfort of a future without random variables. Tonight, precision looked like frost. "Excuse me," he said, and stepped away. At the table, Lily signed, "The waiter's okay. The floor is slippery there." The music stopped when the glasses fell. That's why everyone was staring. Eleanor's eyes shimmered. "Thank you for telling me," her hands replied. The two of them laughed silently at shared details. The conductor's horrified face, a guest who nearly slipped on a strawberry. A private world opened, and for once it wasn't sealed against anyone. It was simply real. When Michael reached them, Lily straightened, then signed something that made Eleanor smile so wide the room seemed to tilt. "Your son loves you," Lily told her. "He forgets how to show it." Heat rose behind Michael's eyes. "Mother," he said aloud, then stopped, breath catching at his own old habit, speaking into a void he never bridged. He lifted his hands, stiff, awkward, and signed haltingly, "I'm sorry." A dozen guests watched in shock as the billionaire stumbled through apologies with his fingers instead of his mouth. Eleanor touched his wrist. "Slow down." He did. For once in a decade, Michael let himself be taught. The animal that never left Eleanor's side, a silver-muzzled golden retriever named Poppy, thumped her tail under the table. A retired hearing dog with cloudy eyes, Poppy had spent years alerting Eleanor to doorbells, kettles, storms. Tonight, the dog dozed with the ease of a guardian whose watch is finally shared. "Mr. Blackwood," Lily ventured softly, spoken words supporting the cadence of her hands. "May I show you something?" He nodded. She led them away from the applause and eyes to a quieter corridor lined with portraits. Blackwoods in uniforms and tuxedos, Blackwoods in oil and gold leaf. At the end hung the largest frame, General James Blackwood, jaw like a statue, ribbons poured across his chest. The plaque below read, "Battle of the Bulge, Valor Above and Beyond." Lily stood close, studying the bar pins like constellations. "My teacher says the campaign ribbons are like a calendar," she said. "This one, Ardennes, yes. But the inscription," her brow furrowed. "Someone told me a story once about the Hurtgen Forest, a rescue behind the lines. No one wrote it down because it was complicated." Eleanor's breath caught. Her fingers fluttered, searching memory, then formed a shape Michael hadn't seen in years. His grandfather's secret, told in quiet to a little girl long ago who'd grown into a woman and then into his mother. Rain for weeks, trees like spears. He went anyway. "Who told you?" Michael asked. "My father," Eleanor signed. "He said your grandfather saved men who weren't supposed to be saved. Paperwork lost. Medals given for a different story. Safer story." Michael looked back at the portrait. Once, the painting had been a monument. Now it felt like a locked door. Something old and unsorted shifted in his chest. Pride, yes, but also grief for a truth diluted into ceremony. Behind them, Isabella's heels announced her approach. "This is highly inappropriate," she said, words aimed at Sarah and Lily more than anyone. "Michael, bring your mother back. Guests are asking questions." "They're welcome to," he answered, still staring at the plaque. Then, to Lily, "Where did you learn to sign like that?" "My neighbor is deaf," Lily said. "I like talking to people in the language that fits them." Sarah set down her tray. "She taught herself at the library. We didn't have money for classes." Silence folded over the corridor. Not the heavy Blackwood kind, more like the pause before a decision that divides a life into before and after. Poppy pushed her graying head into Lily's palm as if voting. The world Michael had engineered, predictable, curated, priced, did not account for this. Not for a child who cracked open his mother's solitude with curiosity and kindness. Not for a story in the family blood that refused to stay pretty. Not for a dog sleeping like a saint at a miracle. He felt the architecture of his priorities tilt, load-bearing beams groaning, boardrooms and back channels, donors and deals, the scaffolding of a life that never once asked, "Are you listening?" "Dinner is served," a voice called from the ballroom. "Go ahead," Sarah whispered to Lily. "We've already done enough." Lily shook her head. "Not yet." She stepped closer to the portrait and pointed at a narrow hairline crack along the frame's underside. "There's a keyhole," she said, more surprised than certain. "Hidden." Michael leaned in. He'd passed this painting thousands of times. He'd never seen it. He reached under the frame, fingertips exploring carved scrollwork, until he found it. A tiny hinge, a secret latch. He glanced at his mother. She nodded once. Permission and plea. The panel eased open with a soft wooden sigh. Inside, wrapped in old linen, lay a leather-filled notebook and a dull tin dog tag that wasn't on any registry. The notebook smelled of rain and iron. On the first page, a hand had written 3 words in a tight, urgent script. "Tell it right." Michael closed his eyes. When he opened them, he wasn't looking at a legend. He was looking at a man who had left him work to do. From the ballroom, applause rose like surf. Out here, the 4 of them, Billionaire, mother, Maid's daughter, and a tired golden retriever, stood in a smaller, truer ceremony. Michael lifted his hands again, slower now. "I want to learn," he told his mother. "Will you teach me?" Eleanor smiled with her whole face. "Yes," she signed, "and so will she." She nodded toward Lily. This time, when the music swelled, it felt like accompaniment, not camouflage. The hierarchy, carefully constructed, ruthlessly enforced, had a hairline crack of its own. Through it, light began to pour. For a few days after the gala, the Blackwood mansion hummed with whispers. Servants gossiped in the pantry. The society pages called Lily the little girl who made the Ice Queen smile. Michael's PR team begged him to spin the story before it went viral. He said nothing, but behind his silence was turmoil. He couldn't shake the image of his mother's hands flying through the air, alive again because of a maid's daughter. It made him proud and ashamed. Proud that Eleanor had found joy. Ashamed that a stranger had given it to her while he, her own son, had offered only convenience. Isabella saw the change and hated it. At brunch 2 mornings later, she dropped the folded newspaper beside his plate. "This is what happens when you let the help get too comfortable," she said. "The tabloids are painting you as some sentimental prince. We have investors, Michael." He glanced at the headline, "Heiress's Deaf Mother Saved from Isolation by Staff Girl." There was a photo, Lily signing, Eleanor glowing, and Michael caught in the background, eyes wide. "Maybe sentiment isn't bad," he murmured. "Don't be naive," Isabella snapped. "That child made a spectacle of your family." Across the table, Eleanor sat calmly, hands folded. She couldn't hear the words, but she could read lips, and she knew exactly what Isabella said. Her gaze hardened. That afternoon, Isabella summoned Sarah and Lily to the conservatory. Her smile was glass thin. "You two have caused quite a stir," she said sweetly. "The Blackwoods appreciate discretion. Perhaps you prefer other employment?" Sarah froze. "We haven't done anything wrong, ma'am." "Oh, you've done plenty. You've turned a private matter into gossip. Do you know how quickly good references can disappear?" Lily stepped forward. Her small hands trembled, but her chin lifted. "I just talked to her. That's all." "Talked?" Isabella scoffed. "You performed. You embarrassed Mr. Blackwood and confused Mrs. Blackwood. She doesn't need pity." "Maybe she needs friends," Lily said softly. The slap came so fast even Sarah didn't see it coming. Isabella's manicured hand cracking across the table, sending a vase crashing to the floor. The noise brought Michael running. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. Lily's wide eyes, Sarah shaking, Isabella's perfect mask cracking. "What happened?" he demanded. "She was insolent," Isabella said. "You see what happens when we let boundaries blur?" Michael turned to Sarah. "Is that true?" Sarah's voice broke. "She defended your mother, sir." The room went dead silent. Eleanor appeared in the doorway behind him, guided by Poppy's gentle nudge. She looked at the pieces of glass on the floor, then at Isabella's raised hand. Her expression said everything. Michael spoke slowly, deliberately. "Isabella, apologize." "To them?" she gasped. "Yes," he said, "to them. I will not." "Then you can leave." Her jaw dropped. "You're ending our engagement over a servant?" He met her stare. "No, over your cruelty." She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "You'll regret this. The board already doubts you. Without me, you'll be eaten alive." "Then let them eat," he said, and walked away. Isabella stormed out of the mansion that night, her departure echoed by the sound of luxury wheels on wet gravel. When the door closed, Eleanor sank into a chair, shoulders trembling. Lily rushed to her side, signing frantically. "Are you okay?" Eleanor smiled weakly and signed back. "Proud, very proud." Michael stood watching, emotions warring behind his calm face. In the corner, Sarah whispered, "We'll pack, sir. We don't want more trouble." But Michael stopped her. "You're not going anywhere." He looked around the grand, cold room that had witnessed generations of power, and for the first time he saw it clearly. Gold frames, silverware, silence. A museum of status, not a home. "From now on," he said quietly, "no one here loses their dignity because of mine." That night, alone in his father's study, Michael stared at the old family crest carved above the fireplace, a lion holding a sword, motto engraved beneath, "Strength above all." He whispered to the empty room, "Maybe it's time we choose a different kind of strength." And with that, the empire of appearances began to crack. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. The mansion was silent, except for the rain tapping against the tall windows, a sound his mother would never hear. He sat in his father's old office, staring at the cracked leather notebook they'd found behind the portrait. The first page still burned in his mind. Tell it right? Those words unlocked everything. He remembered being 12, a boy in a suit, 2 sizes too big, standing beside that same portrait during his grandfather's funeral. The speeches were long, polished, empty. They spoke of medals, campaigns, victories. Nobody spoke of the man. After the ceremony, he had found his mother sitting alone on the back steps, her hair wet from the drizzle, her dog Poppy at her feet. She'd written something on a piece of paper and pressed it into his hand. He hadn't understood it then. Now, decades later, he realized what it meant. He taught me to be brave without being loud. That was the real Blackwood legacy, not empire, not wealth, but quiet courage. Somewhere along the line, Michael had buried that lesson under ambition. He turned the pages of the notebook. Inside were field sketches, fragments of coordinates, and one photo, a young soldier smiling beside a man who looked exactly like Lily. On the back, in faded ink, Martinez, the one who kept us alive. Michael froze. Martinez. Lily's last name. He read further. The journal detailed a secret rescue during the Hurtgen Forest campaign, a suicide mission his grandfather had volunteered for against orders. The government rewrote it later as the Battle of the Bulge. Heroes had to be tidy. Truth rarely was. At the bottom of the last entry, if they ever ask, tell them it was worth it. We saved 147 men. One was a boy named Thomas Martinez. Michael leaned back in the chair, heart pounding. Thomas Martinez, Lily's great-grandfather. The Maid's family hadn't just worked for the Blackwoods. They had saved them. He closed the notebook carefully and stared into the darkness. All the walls of status, lineage, superiority, they crumbled in that single revelation. His thoughts drifted to his mother's life. He saw her as a young woman in old photographs, smiling, signing freely with her father before the world turned cold. After his death, she'd been married off into the Blackwood dynasty, where silence was considered weakness. She had learned to endure it. Dinner tables where everyone spoke but her, business partners who ignored her nods, parties where music blared for people who didn't listen. She had watched her husband die early, her son grow hard, and her home fill with glass instead of warmth. And through it all, she kept her language alive, signing to herself, to Poppy, to memories. Michael realized that her loneliness hadn't been caused by deafness. It was caused by people who refused to listen. The next morning, he found her in the sunroom, bathed in golden light. She was reading a book by touch, tracing her fingers over embossed letters. Poppy dozed beside her. He sat down across from her, notebook in hand. She looked up, curious. He signed clumsily. I found something. About him. Her eyes widened. He placed the open pages before her. For a long time, she didn't move. Then, with trembling hands, she reached out and traced the old handwriting as if touching her father's ghost. Tears welled in her eyes. She signed slowly. I knew it. They lied to protect the story, not the truth. He nodded. Lily saw it first. At the mention of the girl's name, Eleanor smiled. She listens, she signed, more than people with perfect hearing. Michael sat back, emotions swirling, guilt, pride, awe. He remembered the way Lily had stood up to Isabella, the calm bravery in her eyes. She was only 10, but she had more grace than most of the people who filled his boardroom. That night he went down to the servant quarters, a place he hadn't visited since childhood. The corridor smelled faintly of soap and coffee. He stopped outside Sarah and Lily's door, hesitated, then knocked. Sarah opened it, startled. "Mr. Blackwood?" He raised a hand gently. "Just Michael tonight." Inside, Lily was sitting cross-legged on the bed, surrounded by sketchbooks. She looked up, blinking. "Can I show you something?" he asked. She nodded eagerly and held up a drawing. Eleanor, sitting by the fireplace, signing, with Poppy at her feet. Above it, written in careful letters, "Her hands are the sound of love." Something in him broke then, the dam of pride and distance he'd built his whole life. He smiled faintly. "Lily, you were right about the medal. My grandfather wrote about a man named Thomas Martinez. I think that was your great-grandfather." Lily's eyes widened. "Really?" He nodded. "He saved him. Saved all of them." For a moment, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "Mom always said we owed no one. Maybe we've all just been owing each other kindness." Michael laughed quietly, the kind that trembles with truth. Maybe that's how debts should work. Before leaving, he handed Sarah a sealed envelope. "I want you both to stay here," he said. "No more servant quarters. Move upstairs. And whatever you need for Lily's education, I'll cover it." Sarah's lips trembled. "Mr. Blackwood, we can't accept—" "You can," he said, "and you will. My family owes yours more than you'll ever know." As he turned to go, Lily called out, "Mr. Blackwood." He looked back. She raised her hands and signed, slowly but perfectly, "Thank you for listening." He nodded once, unable to speak. When he stepped into the corridor, he caught his reflection in the window, the billionaire who had everything but warmth. Now, for the first time, he saw a man trying to earn it back. He whispered the words written in that old notebook, "Tell it right." And that's exactly what he intended to do. 3 nights later, the Blackwood Foundation hosted its annual charity summit, a glittering event streamed live to millions. Cameras lined the walls, journalists fought for angles, and Michael's PR team whispered instructions like generals before battle. He stood backstage, adjusting his cufflinks, but his reflection in the mirror looked different, less polished, more human. In his jacket pocket was the leather notebook, the one that had rewritten everything. For years, these events had been his stage, a show of power, influence, and control. But tonight, he wasn't here to impress investors. He was here to tell the truth. When the host called his name, applause erupted. Michael stepped into the light, blinded for a second by the flash of cameras. Rows of powerful faces stared up at him, the same kind that once decided who mattered and who didn't. He took a slow breath. The script prepared by his PR team waited on the podium. He pushed it aside. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, "the Blackwood Foundation was built to honor courage. But for too long, we've only honored the kind that looks good in photos." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. My grandfather was celebrated for a victory he didn't win, because the real story was inconvenient. A man named Thomas Martinez saved his life. That man's family still works in my home today. Silence fell, like glass shattering in slow motion. Cameras flashed wildly. "I've spent years building walls around my name," he continued. But a 10-year-old girl tore them down with nothing but kindness and sign language. People began whispering, recognizing the story from the tabloids. He looked toward the side of the stage where Eleanor sat with Poppy at her feet, and Lily stood beside her, wide-eyed, hands folded tightly. "My mother taught me strength," Michael said, "but that child taught me courage." He turned from the microphone, walked to the front edge of the stage, and faced his mother directly. The cameras followed every movement. He lifted his hands and began to sign, slowly, carefully, every gesture illuminated by the spotlight. "I never listened. I'm listening now. I love you." The audience gasped. Hundreds of people watching a billionaire break his silence, not with words, but with hands trembling from truth. Eleanor stood, tears glimmering, and signed back, "I love you too, my son." Applause thundered through the hall, real, raw, unstoppable. Even the cameras couldn't capture the intimacy of that moment. A mother and son bridging decades of silence while the world watched in awe. When it finally quieted, Michael turned back to the microphone. "Starting tonight, the Blackwood Foundation is funding a new division, one that supports children with disabilities, scholarships for sign language education, and job opportunities for the hearing impaired. It will be called the Lily Initiative." Every reporter stood. Flash bulbs exploded like stars. Eleanor smiled through tears. Lily covered her mouth, overwhelmed, and in that thunder of applause, Michael felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. He had spoken without sound, and somehow the whole world had heard him. The following morning, the world woke up to a story that broke the internet. Billionaire breaks silence with his deaf mother, creates foundation for children like her. Clips from the gala spread everywhere. The moment Michael signed "I love you" had been replayed millions of times, translated into dozens of languages, stitched into videos of people teaching each other the same 3 signs. For once, the Blackwood name wasn't trending for profit. It was trending for humanity. But inside the empire, the ripple turned into a wave. The board was furious. Some called his speech reckless. Others, a PR stunt gone sentimental. Profits were down slightly after he had redirected millions into the Lily Initiative. Analysts predicted shareholder panic. Investors demanded answers. Michael didn't flinch. He'd been through battles where he had everything to lose, his reputation, his wealth, his legacy. But this was different. This time, he was ready to lose it all if it meant doing what was right. At the emergency board meeting that afternoon, the conference room buzzed with tension. Gray suits, polished shoes, cold ambition. The same kind of people who used to intimidate him. Carter, the senior board member, leaned back in his chair. "You've gone rogue, Michael. That speech was not approved. You jeopardized decades of corporate alliances." Michael stood at the head of the table, calm and silent. His mother's hearing aid rested in his pocket, a reminder that not all power needs to be loud. "What I did," he said, "was tell the truth. Maybe that scares you." "You're turning the foundation into a charity circus," another snapped. "Our mission is influence, not emotion." Michael looked around the table, faces of people who'd never missed a gala but hadn't visited a single community project. He smiled faintly. "Then maybe you've forgotten what the word foundation means," he said. Carter slammed a file onto the table. "We've called for a vote of confidence. Either you reverse your decision or you're removed as CEO." Michael nodded. "All right, let's vote." Hands rose, one by one, in favor of his removal. 8, 9, 10. Then a knock echoed from the door. The room turned as Eleanor Blackwood entered, dressed simply, Poppy trotting at her side. The guards hadn't stopped her. Nobody ever dared to deny the matriarch. "Mrs. Blackwood, this is a private meeting," Carter stammered. She smiled gently and raised her hands. Michael interpreted aloud as she signed, "You called it private, but you built this empire on my husband's name, my father's honor, and my son's silence. None of that was ever private." The board froze. Eleanor continued signing, her gestures graceful but sharp as glass. "You want numbers? Here are numbers. The Lily Initiative has already doubled our engagement rate online, tripled volunteer registrations, and attracted sponsors who care about more than tax deductions." Carter blinked. "How could you possibly know that?" Michael grinned. "Because she's been watching your report since 6 a.m. She may not hear, but she reads faster than any of you." A ripple of laughter, nervous, reluctant, ran around the table. Eleanor's final sign was simple. "This company carries our name, and today I take it back." Michael turned to the board. "You heard her. Either stand for what the Blackwoods are supposed to mean, courage, truth, and compassion, or step down." No one moved. Finally, Carter exhaled. "You've changed, Michael." Michael nodded. "Yes, that's leadership." He walked out to a thunder of camera flashes as news crews waited in the lobby. Behind him, Eleanor and Lily followed side by side, the two people who had rewritten the definition of family. Outside, sunlight bounced off the skyscraper's mirrored glass. Michael looked up at the logo that bore his family's name and said quietly, "Let's make sure it finally means something." That week, the Lily Initiative launched its first major project, building free sign language schools across underprivileged neighborhoods, starting in Chicago. The first class enrolled 72 students, children from deaf and hearing families alike. The opening day was streamed live. Michael sat beside his mother in the front row while Lily stood proudly at the podium, tiny hands steady over the microphone. "Some people," she said, "think silence means nothing is happening. But sometimes silence is where the biggest things grow." Eleanor's eyes shone with pride. Michael clapped, unable to hide his tears. Cameras caught that image, the billionaire crying openly, unapologetically, and it became the face of a movement. Soon, universities began adding sign language programs under the initiative's grants. Companies reached out to hire graduates. Even world leaders mentioned the Lily Initiative in speeches about empathy and innovation. But for Michael, the real victory wasn't the headlines. It was at home. In the evenings, the mansion no longer echoed with emptiness. The sound of hand signing filled the air like poetry. Sarah had become the estate manager, running things with quiet confidence. Lily tutored local children in sign language on weekends. Sometimes Michael would walk into the garden at dusk to find Eleanor sitting with Lily, the two of them talking in silence, laughter flashing between gestures. He'd stand at the door, not wanting to interrupt the beauty of something so ordinary and yet so divine. One night, Lily looked up at him and signed playfully, "Come join us, Mr. Blackwood." He smiled and sat down beside them, signing back with clumsy fingers. "Still learning." Eleanor laughed, then took his hands, guiding them. "Learning is listening," she signed. For the first time, the three of them, Billionaire, Maid's daughter, and the woman who had lived too long in silence, sat together under the stars, speaking a language that didn't need words. Above them, The wind moved through the trees, soft and full, carrying a message that seemed almost audible. You did it right. When the world changes, not everyone celebrates. A month after the Lily Initiative's launch, a familiar name resurfaced: Isabella Vance. Her face appeared on talk shows, dripping with bitterness disguised as concern. "I loved Michael once," she told the cameras, voice trembling just enough to seem sincere. "But he's lost himself in charity theatrics. He's being manipulated by that Maid and her daughter." It's tragic, really. Clips spread across social media, but this time, no one believed her. Comment sections overflowed with anger. The girl gave his deaf mom her voice back. If this is manipulation, the world needs more of it. Sponsors that once fawned over Isabella now distanced themselves. Her invitations vanished. Her credibility dissolved, one headline at a time. In contrast, the Blackwood soared. The foundation's transparency reports went viral. Every dollar traceable, every school audited. Donations doubled. But Michael didn't gloat. He didn't call out Isabella, didn't demand retractions. When a journalist asked him about her public remarks, he simply said, "Some people talk, others listen. I choose to listen." That line trended for a week straight. And somewhere in a quiet apartment uptown, Isabella watched the interview alone. The silence pressed around her, heavy and endless. The same silence Eleanor had lived with her whole life, but without the grace to understand it. For the first time, Isabella was on the outside of power, looking in. Meanwhile, inside the Blackwood mansion, laughter replaced echoes. Lily ran through the garden with Poppy chasing her heels, sunlight glinting off the old metal now displayed openly in the hall. The real story finally told. One afternoon, Eleanor stood in front of that display with her son. "Do you regret any of it?" she signed. Michael shook his head. "Not a second. You taught me something, Mother. So did she." "The little girl?" He nodded. "She reminded me that the smallest voice can carry the loudest truth." Eleanor smiled, the kind of smile that glowed without sound. Across the hall, the household staff paused to watch. Their once untouchable employer talking with his mother in perfect, graceful sign language. No interpreter, no distance. For the first time in Blackwood history, the man at the top didn't need to speak to be understood. And somewhere far away, as the world moved on and Isabella faded into irrelevance, the billionaire's silence became the loudest legacy of all. Spring came softly to the Blackwood estate. The magnolias bloomed along the stone paths, and sunlight spilled through the tall windows like forgiveness. Inside, the house that once echoed with power and pride now pulsed with life. Children laughing, hands signing, voices blending in harmony. It wasn't just a mansion anymore. It was a school. The first Lily Initiative Home Academy had opened in what used to be the ballroom. The same floor where champagne once glittered now carried chalk dust and tiny footprints. Eleanor sat at the back of the class each morning, helping teach sign language to parents and children who couldn't afford tutors. She had become the voice of a movement she'd once been locked out of. Michael stood by the door, watching her. The sight still made his throat tighten. A year ago, his mother had lived in a world of silence, surrounded by people who never tried to understand it. Now, that same silence had become a bridge, one that connected hundreds of lives. Lily, now 11, darted between desks, helping younger kids shape their hands into letters. Her laughter filled the room, pure, unfiltered, free. Sarah watched from the hallway, eyes shining. She'd never dreamed her daughter would change lives, or that kindness could rewrite the story of an entire family. After class, Michael walked with Lily through the garden. She carried a small globe tucked under her arm, the same one she used to study geography. "Remember this?" she said. "The island we talked about. Henderson Island, the one full of plastic?" He nodded. "You said everything's connected." Lily smiled. "It still is. I'm giving a talk about it next week at my new school." He chuckled softly. "You've become quite the teacher." "No," she said, looking up at him. "You did." Michael blinked, surprised. "Me?" "You taught me that even grown-ups can learn new languages, especially the one that doesn't need words." Her meaning hit him harder than any applause ever could. That night, the Blackwood mansion glowed with warmth. Eleanor read by the fire, Poppy asleep beside her. Lily sat at the piano, her fingers moving gracefully, not playing songs with notes, but rhythms that matched her mother's heartbeat. Michael stood at the window, watching the stars over the city. For once, the skyline didn't feel like competition. It felt like connection. He whispered, "Grandfather, we told it right." And somewhere between the light and the silence, between memory and hope, he felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. This was the legacy he was meant to build. Not skyscrapers, not fortune, but understanding. Because sometimes the loudest sound a man can make is learning to listen.